I thought that I was completely sure. I thought that I was completely assured in my identity as a man and in my decision to transition. But the surgery had completely changed my perspective because I was so unlike the other treatments, which were their effects came gradually over time. This was immediate. And it was clear just how permanent and how destructive it was to my body. I remember waking up from surgery and that day going home, and I had this elaborate fantasy of like being on a beach and taking my shirt off and just having my bare chest in the sun, and finally being able to like change and like go swimming without having to like wear a top. But the fantasy eventually went away and reality hit very soon. With once I had my bandages unwrapped about a week or two afterward, and I started having to wash my wounds and take care of them at home, and just look down at this now barren area of my body that was covered in scars. That was brutal. That was really tough to see. Like, I felt like a freak. I felt like a monster just looking at myself in the mirror, and looking at all the surgical markings and everything. And around this time, I actually started to miss my femininity a little bit. I started growing out my hair again. I started dyeing it. I was missing my childhood a bit. And I was missing just the little things about being a little girl.
Welcome to a brand new episode of the Michele Tafoya podcast. Do you know the name Chloe Cole? If you do, you're going to want to hear this incredible interview. If you don't, you're going to want to hear this incredible interview. Before I go any further, please hit that subscribe button. We'd love to have you on board for every episode. Just click subscribe, whether you're listening on Spotify or Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts, YouTube, Rumble. Click subscribe so you never miss an episode. It's totally free, so why wouldn't you? Okay, if you go to Chloe Cole's Instagram page, she says she is 20 years old. She has an American flag, and California detrans woman on a mission for children and truth. Told Congress my story, now sharing it with you. And she shares it with us in great detail. And you may want to have a Kleenex or two on standby, have an open mind and an open heart, and be prepared to be inspired, because there are some young people in this world who are very inspirational, and Chloe Cole is one of them. Transitioned to be a boy as a young teen, and now she is detransitioning. And her story is incredible. She's become a major voice on this issue. Chloe Cole is our guest next. Chloe, welcome. I'm such a big fan of yours that I'm always surprised when I meet people who haven't heard your name or your story yet. And so I'd like to amplify it a little bit, because you're an example for a lot of people just to have spine in what you believe and to have the courage to get out there and speak about it. If you don't mind taking us back to your childhood and when you sort of started to have this gender dysphoria. Hey, I want to tell you about my friends at besthotgrill.com. You know, there are a lot of special events coming up soon, and besthotgrill.com recommends the gifts of good grilling and healthy eating. If you have a mom, dad, or grad you want to honor, do it with the gift that will be used, be unforgettable, and truly hot. That would be a Solaire infrared grill from besthotgrill.com. Solaire infrared grills heat up to 1,000 degrees in just 3 minutes. And it produces juicy, tasty food that is unmatched by any conventional grill. I'm telling you, I have one. I can vouch for this. Now, maybe you're hitting the road or having a staycation. Solaire has hot and fast portable, built-in, and cart models to help you step up your grilling. All Solaire infrared grills are made in the USA and built to last. Solaire grills deliver the wow that everybody likes to get in a gift or major purchase. Learn more about the amazing Solaire infrared grills at besthotgrill.com. Besthotgrill.com. Just go to besthotgrill.com. If you don't mind taking us back to your childhood and when you sort of started to have this gender dysphoria?
So in my pre-adolescent years, really from my early childhood, I had, I guess, a mix of stereotypically girly and tomboyish traits. Um, when I was really little, I loved playing dress up and wearing dresses and having my sisters put makeup on me and playing with all of our dolls together. But I also found that I really enjoyed the company of the boys and the men around me. And the older that I got, the more I just felt like I related to the opposite sex than my own. And this was because of shared interests, a shared sense of humor, a shared personality and values that I never really found in common with my female role models and with the girls at school. Um, but this is something that I never really thought much of. It was something that I felt made me unique. These things were I looked at as strengths until I started to roughly until the I hit the age of 11 or 12, and I had been in puberty for a few years. I was a bit of an early bloomer. I was one of the first few people to start developing in my class around third or fourth grade. And with that came a lot of attention that I don't think girls who are 8 or 9, most of them don't really feel equipped to deal with, especially if they don't really have like any sort of adult guidance around that. It can be very uncomfortable. And I just felt like I wanted to hide. Like I wanted to crawl out of my own skin during that time, which I mean, for anybody who's going through puberty or anybody who's going through adolescence, that's kind of a normal feeling. But I
Absolutely.
always felt like there was just something that made me isolated in some way. Um, I was diagnosed with learning disability when I was younger, and I always just interacted and behaved and thought differently from my peers. And at times I had been bullied for it. And the older that I got, the more that I felt like there was something missing. Like there was a part of my like I was struggling to sort of establish my identity, especially after moving schools in elementary or middle school, and I felt like I just couldn't understand myself, and the people around me couldn't understand me either. And this is something that I ruminated on for years and years until I started using social media, and I discovered that there was a community of other kids online who were quite like me, in not only in terms of our interests. Like I was introduced to the transgender community through online communities that were focused around primarily the video games that I played, but also things like artwork and books that I read. And these kids had a lot of these same identity struggles growing up, and even like down to them growing up a little bit more non-conforming to their sex. Many of them were tomboys, many of them were effeminate men or effeminate boys. And I just felt like I kept finding myself more and more and more with these people until I thought, well, maybe there's a reason why. Maybe I was never destined to be a young woman. Maybe I was a man this whole time, and that's why I act more like a boy. That's why I experience these feelings of discomfort around my body and my developing chest. I thought I'd finally found the answer at 12 years old.
At 12, at 12. I mean, anyone who remembers being 12 realizes you go through a lot of awkwardness, you go through a lot of confusion, you go through so much growth, and a lot of it is uncomfortable. And I think it's very natural. So what did you do next with that feeling? How did you take a step toward transitioning from there?
Well, I had transitioning on my mind from very early on, discovering these things. Um, the community focuses so much on moving forward in your transition, and it's kind of like there's like this pipeline that just goes from socially transitioning to starting, if you're a kid, on puberty blockers or on hormones to masculinize or feminize your body, and then eventually most people will end up getting surgery. But there's never really any questioning of the possibility of detransition or regret or any other ways of moving forward or treating these feelings that you have, because being transgender is treated as something that is an innate quality within this community. It's talked
That
about like
so
there's like a
therefore that it's
genetic or a physiological component, and that's
right.
just something that you're stuck with. It's not a choice that you make. And I fell into this belief that I actually had the brain of a young man in a woman's body, and that was what was causing these feelings. So there's such a medical focus. Um, and even within, I found that to be true even with my own doctors down the line. Before I got into any sort of clinical treatment, though, I decided to start with a social transition because I wanted to get used to this idea and this role socially of being a young man. And I wanted to make myself more convincing to the people around me before I started telling them, hey, like, please, like, start calling me by this different name, or asking my mom and dad to call me their son rather than their daughter. So I started cutting my hair shorter. I started to kind of look more at like the boys around me, my big brothers, my dad, and try to emulate the way that I dressed and behaved after them. And then eventually I told my mom and my dad through a letter, and my family. They responded the way that I got different responses from different members of my family. My mom and dad were naturally very, very cautious, and they wanted to help me feel comfortable, but they also didn't want me to really go down any permanent route because I was 12 going on 13. They knew that I was far too young to be making a major lifelong decision like that, especially governing my developing body. It would just be too much for me. But they sent me to therapy, not really knowing what to expect. They just wanted to help me be guided through these feelings and just be allowed to be a kid.
Yeah.
Most of my sisters were very positive about it, but I found that my older brothers, particularly my oldest brother, was very uncomfortable with the idea. And he was in the Navy, and he actually had transgender friends outside of the service who told him, like, she's a child. She doesn't know what she wants yet. Like, this is a really bad idea for her to be going down this path.
Wow. Okay.
And so there was a bit of strife between me and him for a few years. And he, as angry as it made me, he really tried his best for me to try to dissuade my mom and dad from saying yes to this, to try. And it wasn't something that we really ever directly talked about, I think because he was afraid of pushing me away, but he really cared. And um, with my immature adolescent brain, thought that he just hated me, or that he was being ignorant, that he didn't know what he was talking about.
Right.
But my mom and dad had no idea what they were dealing with, and frankly, most parents don't. It's a lot for any parent to really handle this kind of thing, especially with the culture that we have around this today, of feeling like you're boxed into only one option, of only affirming your child by your clinicians, by your child's counselors, by the other adults in your child's life who are involved in some way. And
for who, Chloe, for you, you said they first put you in counseling, correct?
Yes.
And how did your counselor approach you with this?
So there was really not any questioning or any pushback. It was just, they would ask, like, okay, so what's your perceived sex? And what sex or what gender would you prefer us to call you by? And what's your given name, your preferred name? What name do you want us to call you when you're talking to your parents? It was all about what I wanted, rather than maybe what my actual needs might have been. And they would ask about my distress related to my sex and how I was experiencing it and how it would present. But then I don't really feel like there was any real treatment or diving further into that. It was just accepted as a fact that I was experiencing gender dysphoria, and that it was an identity issue, and that the way to move forward with it was a social and eventually medical gender transition. Now, I didn't really necessarily feel pushed into the medical treatments from that point on, but it was the only option that I knew of. And nobody, not even the actual physicians who I saw for these treatments, had ever told me, you have another choice. And in fact, it's probably better. You're probably better off not going on these treatments, at least while you're still a child. And my mom and dad weren't told that either. They weren't told about the high desistance rates that children tend to experience when they're just left alone and they're not affirmed. They weren't told about, my mom and dad had actually, so we had these appointments pretty much separately. And that's the model that a lot of states and a lot of these offices will, or a lot of these clinical offices will follow when they are treating children with gender dysphoria. They will often talk to the child privately. And it's for the purpose of getting information out of them that they might not be comfortable with when they're around their parents, right?
Right.
But that also means that the parents are often left in the dark, and they're never really followed up with about what is being discussed during these appointments. And my mom and dad they're very frustrated with that, because I wasn't communicating with them, because I didn't really know how I could talk these feelings about them. And I also actually, I believe, was previously diagnosed earlier in my childhood with some sort of condition that affects my ability to communicate and to I think understand language. Okay. So that was something that there was already that roadblock between us. So they decided to get to the bottom of things themselves and talk to the therapist privately. And they were asking very reasonable questions, like, so first of all, why does our child feel this way about herself? And why is she so concerned with going down the medical route? Why can't we just wait until she's at least 18? She's at least legally an adult. She'll be a lot more mature than she may be now, and she'll be physically developed. Why can't we wait? What are the chances that if we do this now, she's going to regret this? And it was like all of their concerns were just completely ignored.
So they had those concerns. They could foresee potential pitfalls of all of this, but how much were they kind of given that line, Chloe, that we hear a lot of parents are given? Hey, you can have a live son or a dead daughter.
That was the exact premise that they were given.
You would take your own life.
Yes, they were not given any other choice. First of all, they were told that this was an innate thing for me, that this was something that I could not control, that being transgender, that children know what their gender identity is from a very young age. I think they said like 2 or 3 years old, some crazy age like that, where children can't even like fully express themselves yet through language.
Yeah, I wonder how they know that about toddlers. Did the toddlers tell them?
Did they ask the toddler?
Yeah, Chloe, I remember reading about a woman in Northern California, a psychiatrist or psychologist, who said, "Here's how you know. Babies know if a little girl has a barrette in her hair and she pulls it out, it's because she doesn't want to have the barrette in her hair because she's not feminine. And if a boy has
uncomfortable."
Yeah, right. It couldn't possibly be that, right? And if a little boy is in a onesie and he unbuttons the onesie, it's because he wants to be wearing a dress. This stuff is insane to me. It's like, how can anyone possibly buy those explanations, those descriptions of anyway?
It's all based completely on stereotypes.
Yeah, it's crazy. So when did you go from social transition to the medical stuff?
I mean, during that point in time, before my mom and dad had that appointment with the doctors, I had been talking to them a little bit about wanting to go on testosterone and wanting to change my body and my physical appearance, which of course they were very worried about.
As you sit here now, Chloe, and you think back to that, what do you recall how you felt? Did you feel a certainty about it? Did you feel confident in that belief that this was going to help you, or were you sort of grasping, or do you even remember how you felt?
Oh, I mean, I was confident. I was completely sure, but it was a naive confidence that children naturally tend to have at that age. When they're starting to move into adolescence, you become ballsy. You think that you're finally grown up, that you know everything, that you know yourself, you know how the world around you works, and that nothing can ever get to you, that you'll never die, that nothing could hurt you, you're invincible. And I think that's a normal part of developing that should be respected by these clinicians who know better. They absolutely know better. They know what they are doing to these children. They know that they are not mature enough to consent, and that they, in that adolescent age range, they tend to make more risky decisions because they're trying to figure themselves out, and they should be left to do that in a way that is developmentally appropriate and with guardrails. And by allowing children to mess with their own development, to take these drugs that will affect them permanently, it's unconscionable.
It's criminal. So at what age did you then begin the medical process?
I was 13 years old when I began taking the first two treatments, which were the puberty blockers and the testosterone. Now, these were things that my mom and dad never would have said yes to in a million years if it not for the fact that they were told that my life would literally be on the line if I didn't have them. And they wanted to protect me. They wanted what was best for me, and they wanted to make sure that I would grow up happy and feeling confident in myself and thriving, which was what they were told by the doctors, that I was almost certainly going to die, that I could take my own life just because of the distress of feeling like I wasn't, like myself wasn't aligned with my body, which of course was a complete lie. We had other options, but I don't blame my mom and dad for saying yes with the stress and the duress that they were under.
No question. The
first drug that I was put on was called Lupron, which has actually been subject to several lawsuits for various purposes that it's been used for. It primarily is used, I think, for reproductive conditions, such as endometriosis, certain cancers like prostate cancer, I think breast cancer as well in certain cases. But it also has been used to chemically castrate sex offenders because it blocks off the communication between the brain and the gonads, which are either the ovaries in women or the testes in men. And I basically went through menopause while I was on them at 13 years old. Like I was already a few years into developing. So all of a sudden having that cut off, I was experiencing hot flashes. I was experiencing all these uncomfortable physical sensations, and emotionally I was very numb while I was on them. So I wanted to move on. I wanted to move on to the next treatment because it just felt like hell being on it. I hated it.
Oh God.
And when I began the testosterone, it was completely different.
Next?
Yes. It was like I finally had like my energy and my vitality back. I felt stronger and more confident than ever because I'm taking a steroid. And like I felt like I was on top of the world just like with the first dose within that first week. And with what I was told by my doctors, by the transgender community, it was like all of these physical changes are going to come, and I'm going to be so excited about that. I'm finally going to look like a young man. My voice is going to get deeper. My body and face are going to look more masculine, and I'll start to actually integrate into male spaces and be treated as if I'm actually a member of the opposite sex. And all of that happened. I really looked and sounded like I was just a young teenage boy. And I went from looking very feminine in my 8th grade year to looking and sounding like any other freshman boy my first year of high school.
And how did you feel? Like, how did that impact your confidence, your outlook about your life?
There is a period of time where I was very satisfied, actually. And I mean, for the first time in a long time, I felt like I could be confident in my appearance. I felt like a handsome young man. And I mean, it was to the point that there were even like girls at school who were like developing crushes on me. It was just it was a completely different world for me, socially. And I started to actually
what was it like to know that girls had crushes on you? Did that excite you, or did that kind of make you go, huh? Because I'm just wondering what that did to you.
I mean, I thought it was pretty cool. I wasn't interested in any of them because I'm still straight, but it was like, it was a big confidence boost.
Oh my
It was a
goodness.
really weird dynamic because most of them actually didn't know that I was one of them. But
Interesting. That's fascinating.
I found that it was there were some things that made the social dynamics different. I learned about some of the difficulties of being a young man, actually. It can be a bit of a lonely world if you don't really have like a purpose or people close to you who you can fall back on. You can start to feel lost very quickly. I felt this myself. I saw my young male friends experience this as well. But the way that I was treated by girls, even by girls who, I mean, these girls who had crushes on me, they didn't really have any actual regard for my well-being, and they would often, like, the way that they would express their crushes and their feelings for me would even like go into the territory of like sexual harassment at times. Like, they would like touch me, they would like try to like forcefully kiss me or like grope me, and like it was very uncomfortable for me. And um girls who are like that, if you like, they can be hard for a young man, or in my case, somebody acting as a young man, to say no to, because they'll often cause you further trouble and they'll try to like accuse you of sexual assault. I actually saw this with male friends of mine at school who would say no to girls' advances, and then they would literally be bullied out into another school. And people would spread rumors about them like being rapists and stuff. Like, it was horrible.
Yeah,
and
they think only males are toxic. You know, toxic masculinity. There is some seriously toxic femininity out there.
For sure.
Yeah.
And I kind of got the receiving end of that. And while I mean, at first I had a lot of fun being in this male social role, I have a lot of empathy now for men in general, but especially young men in my generation. I feel like they have a lot of, I think in general, there's like these identity issues and really difficult social dynamics. And these messages, like being told that your masculinity doesn't matter, that you're a threat, that you have to bow down to women. And it can be a very difficult world out there. I thought that the grass was greener on the other side. I thought, like, both sexes, especially in the world today, definitely have their difficulties. But it's never better than the other side, I learned.
Well,
and
particularly
eventually,
not if you're, like you said, you were still straight. I mean, you were, presenting as a young male, and you saw what adolescent males go through. How much further in your medical transition did you go?
I ended up having surgery, actually.
Top surgery.
I had a double mastectomy. I had the surgical removal of my breasts.
How old were you
which
then,
I started
Chloe?
consultations for when I was 14, and
Okay.
I ended up going under the knife at 15. It's
15.
been 5 years. I'm 20 now.
Okay. So when did the regrets start, Chloe?
It wasn't. I thought that I was completely sure. I thought that I was completely assured in my identity as a man and in my decision to transition. But the surgery had completely changed my perspective, because I was so unlike the other treatments, which their effects came gradually over time. This was immediate. And it was clear just how permanent and how destructive it was to my body. I remember waking up from surgery, and that day going home, and it was like, wow, I'm finally over the hump. This is the hardest part, and I've finally gotten through it. So what's next from here? I mean, I'm really excited to have my scars and my skin grafts heal and to be able to go out. And I had this elaborate fantasy of like being on a beach and taking my shirt off and just having my bare chest in the sun. and finally being able to like change and like go swimming without having to like wear a top. But the fantasy eventually went away, and reality hit very soon. With once I had my bandages unwrapped about a week or two afterward, and I started having to wash my wounds and take care of them at home, and just look down at this now barren area of my body that was covered in scars. That was brutal. That was really tough to see. Like, I felt like a freak. I felt like a monster just looking at myself in the mirror, and looking at all the surgical markings and everything. And around this time, I actually started to miss my femininity a little bit. I started growing out my hair again. I started dyeing it. And part of it was that, I mean, this is around the time that the pandemic started, and all like the measures and the distance learning stuff started to happen. So you're kind of just like throwing stuff out there and seeing what sticks. Or a lot of people did, just like experimenting with fashion and stuff. And I definitely was one of those, but for me, it kind of came from a place of, I was missing my childhood a bit, and I was missing just the little things about being a little girl. But I had a lot of shame around this too, because people had known, like, everybody around me knew me as a young man, and I was like chest deep, literally, into this decision.
Yeah.
And I really started to have turmoil around my identity again, but I couldn't fathom the idea of going back. I couldn't even think about it, because I thought that there was no going back. That detransition wasn't even possible. It wasn't until the later half of my junior year of high school that I started to take a class in developmental psychology, and I learned things about like how children develop from infancy up until 18 years of age. And I was learning a lot about myself, actually, especially in regards to things like attachment issues and the way that you're raised, and how that plays a role in the way that you develop, that your personality and different flaws about you will develop as you get older. And I figured out that I did have some attachment issues. That I mean, my mom and dad, like, I have a good relationship with them, and I knew that I have always known that they loved me, but we've always had kind of a distant relationship. And I think that played a big role into my identity issues arising as I got older. And that just hit me like a ton of bricks.
Wow.
It started to really, I then knew, like, the issue with my identity isn't because of my sex. It's not my body. It's not my fault. And when I think the final nail in the coffin was when I started reading about how breastfeeding plays a role in like the development of an infant, not only physically, but also in terms of like the intimacy between mother and child. And I started crying. Like, I was sobbing reading through this lesson, because I didn't know how beautiful, how consequential that would be. I didn't know anything about these things. I didn't know that I would want to have children one day. I didn't know that I would want to have that experience of nursing my children and feeding them what God gave me, which, of course, it's not an option for every woman, even women who still have their breasts. But
Right.
the fact that I would never even have a choice ever again just broke me. And I also, at this time, I had some sexual trauma resurface too. I had been sexually assaulted. I was groped by, and I had been harassed over time by a student in 8th grade who was bullying me. And I never reported it, because my teachers saw what was going on throughout the school year, and they never reprimanded this kid. They never held him accountable. He was always in and out of trouble, but he was a danger. And they didn't care. He was clearly dangerous to me. He was picking on a smaller girl with developmental issues, it was very clear that the way that he was treating me was going in a very perverted direction. And the fact that it got to that point that I was sexually assaulted in a classroom by this kid showed to me that I couldn't trust the adults around me. And so I stayed silent about it. But eventually that influenced my decision to get rid of my breasts later on, because I was so afraid of that part of my body. I thought that it was only going to bring me pain.
You know what? That is so important, a realization that I think that, young women who have been, and I know another detransitioner who was also sexually assaulted. And why would you want to invite that? So you think that by being feminine, by having breasts, by being developed, you might be inviting that on yourself. And you want to avoid that at all costs. So that conclusion that you jump to is get rid of the damn breasts, then I won't have that threat anymore. I think that that's a very natural conclusion for a teenager, an underdeveloped brain to get to, unless they're getting counseling that assures them that this is not going to be the way for the rest of their life. I mean, you have so much more life post transition than you had up to that time. It's incredible how irresponsible these doctors are. I'm heartbroken for you. So you had that moment of the breastfeeding discussion is unbelievably fascinating to me. What did you do then? When did you start to realize you didn't want this anymore? And how did you deal with it?
There was a period of a few weeks after that lesson where I was just completely non-functional. I gave up on my studies completely. I spent most of my days, I think, just like crumbling, just in bed, not really doing anything, drifting, pretty much in and out of life. And then one day, one evening, I called. I think it must have been my boyfriend at the time, and I texted my mom, just sobbing, telling them, like, I can't believe I did this to myself. I can't believe that I can't go back. I didn't know any better. This should never have happened. This is the biggest regret of my life, and I'm only 16. I don't feel like I have a life from here. I was just so devastated, and nobody really knew what to do for me other than just be by my side and help me through the tears. And I never cried directly in front of my mom and dad. Like, I would talk to my mom over the phone, but I would never let me see me in tears, because I felt a lot of guilt, because I knew that my parents must have been feeling a lot of guilt too, because of course, like, I wouldn't have been able to go through this if they hadn't signed off and everything. And I held a bit of resentment over them for a bit because of that. I was angry at them for doing it. But as I went into my adult years and I had some time to really think about it, and also to, like, go out into the world and be separate from them, I know now that they were only doing the best with what they were given. And I've seen the full picture of things now that I know what actually went on in those appointments between them and the doctors. And I think as a family, we were failed completely on every single level by these doctors who were supposed to be helping us. I decided to detransition after I had that sort of breakdown. And I mean, I didn't know that there was even a word for it. I didn't know that it was something that happened to other people before. It was just like, well, I'm going to figure out whatever's going on from here. And I decided to actually put a little bit of research into it. I just looked up the word detransition one day. I kind of just put two and two together. Like, if I stop transitioning, then it must be a detransition, right? And it turned out it was a real word. I didn't just make it up. And I found a lot of, like, transgender propaganda around it online, saying, like, oh, it's like completely, it's very rare. It's like less than 1%. It's like, okay, like, this isn't helpful to me. Like, how do I actually do this?
Yeah.
well, I discovered that there was an entire community online of people just like me. There's this like, how would you describe it? Like an online board kind of website called Reddit. And on this board, people were just like, it was mostly people sharing their experiences. There were some like surveys being conducted, which weren't like clinical or like big or anything, but it was like thousands of people just talking about what had happened to them. And I felt like I was seen. These people were going through like the same kind of turmoil, and feelings that I was even before the transition. And I decided to actually eventually enter like a chat room service with these same people. And it was through speaking to these other detransitioners that I finally could completely understand what was going on with me and sort of process everything that happened. And it's like, especially out of like the ideological lens that the transgender community puts everything in. It was like the most neutral space that I had been in to talk about these things in a very, very long time. And like I like getting to talk to adults who had been through the process of transitioning and detransitioning. I had some hope that I could find a future from there, that I could finally live a normal life and heal. As little hope as I had at that time. It was the love of my family that kept me going, as well as like the compassion and the shared experiences of these other detransitioners. And eventually, well, medically, I went cold turkey. I think the night that I broke down crying because I just couldn't take it anymore. I couldn't even look at the syringe anymore. I couldn't look at the vial of testosterone. I just couldn't handle it. I felt so ugly. I felt so broken because of it. And I had some health issues because of the way that I stopped taking it. But with my own doctors, they weren't helping me. They weren't helping me anymore. I had no idea why. I guess now, like, I know that there's no standards of care written for those of us who stop. There's no codes to bill for doctors to even treat us with. So it's kind of like a completely unknown territory, which is ridiculous when they're pushing so many patients through this one-way system. There should be acknowledgement that there are other outcomes, and people like me should be helped out of it. But I had to figure out the medical process completely on my own. And like, I was rapidly losing weight. I think I lost about like 30 pounds between in like 2 months. I was getting sick like every other week. And when I went to my doctors for all these different complications, both from the transition and from stopping, they were turning a blind eye to me. And it was not only very hurtful, it was infuriating. And it was causing me actual turmoil with my physical health.
That stress
But
must have been unreal, Chloe. I mean,
it was rock bottom for me. I fell hard. I ended up dropping out of school my senior year, and I was just at my worst, abusing substances. I had no real friends. I was just hanging out with whoever, because now, like, a lot of my friends turned away from me because I was just an uncomfortable person to be around, because I was crying every day. Like, if I failed a test, I would cry about it. At the lunch table, because everything was just hitting me all at once.
well, not only that, you were going off of a drug that had sustained you in one I mean, this hormone stuff is volatile.
I mean, sex hormones influence many different processes, not only in our body, but also psychologically.
Absolutely.
And as women, we know that fundamentally, because we
No
go through
question.
the 4-stage cycle every month.
Right.
But I had lost friends also because of the ideological changes that I was going through. A lot of my friends at the time, I mean, I don't want to speak ill of them. They were just kids, but they also were like very, very strongly left-leaning. And the moment that I started to challenge that and question everything, it was like gone. So I would often like be left with like the fringe kids at school who would like, many of them were just, they had some sort of personality defect, and they would try to like use me to some means, or they were just not good influences for me to be around. And luckily I found my way out of that, and I started making new friends who were genuinely helpful to me, who really cared about me, who helped me pull out of this. And they were very, very transformative people to be around. And eventually, because of the confidence that they gave me, I decided I want to speak up. I want to speak up about what happened to me and see where it leads me.
Well, it's led you to a lot of, I mean, you're a well-known figure. You're one of the leading, if not the leading figure in the detrans movement. And you have an unbelievable strength and courage about you. First of all, to endure everything you endured and come out of it the other side. You seem to me right now, you're 20, Chloe?
I'm 20.
You're a pretty damn mature 20-year-old. Obviously, you've been through a whole lot, so that doesn't necessarily shock me. But I think you've got an intellect that is far beyond what probably many people saw in you earlier. You're very smart. You're very wise.
Thank you.
And you have spoken out. Now, what about the ability to have some sort of, is there any legal recourse that you have against this medical practice that put you in this place?
From the very beginning of my detransition, I had so much anger about what happened to me. And I immediately wanted to take legal action against the doctors who did this to me because I knew how wrong it was. And I never wanted it to happen to any other child ever again. I started thinking about like my little nieces and nephews and the world that they would grow up in. And it was like, I never want this to even be possible for them because they deserve that. Innocence is so beautiful and they deserve better. And I want to fight for justice for myself and for the future generations. But my mom and dad and I, we didn't even think that it was possible because, I mean, our healthcare provider is Kaiser Permanente, and they have like this arbitration agreement that just makes any sort of legal recourse for anything basically impossible, right? And we signed off on everything. We thought, well, it's probably not in the cards for us. And I hated that. I thought, it's probably true, but it feels like I'm just letting them get away with it. But when I started to speak out, I started gaining a lot more traction than I thought I would. I just hoped that I would have, I don't know, like maybe I would grow like a few thousand followers and then my story would help somebody in some way, right? No. Within a few weeks, journalists were reaching out to me from some pretty decently sized publications. Parents were reaching out to me mostly, just asking me like, you have this like this knowledge that we don't, as somebody's gone through it. Like, how can you help us? And eventually, I actually started having lawyers reaching out to me as well, asking. I was still 17 at the time, so I couldn't like I couldn't like actually file a lawsuit, not on my own anyways, but I was on the cusp of turning 18, and one of those first few lawyers was actually Harmeet Dillon, who at the time was working with Center for American Liberty. And I was very cautious at first, and I was still somebody. I mean, she's a very prominent Republican at the time. I was completely like apolitical, and I didn't even consider myself conservative. So I was a little bit afraid of that like association. But I mean, I started like reading up a little bit about her and the achievements of Center for American Liberty, and I was like, these people are solid, and I find that they really align with my values. And if I really want to change the course of not only the discussion around this, but also the fact that children are actually being harmed by our medical system, I think that going the legal route, holding these doctors accountable through the law, was the way to go. And I since have filed a lawsuit against them, against not only Kaiser, but also all three of the main doctors who were involved in this care and the facility that that does these surgeries.
And
And I'm hoping that not only that it will be successful, but that it will have a ringing success that will create a precedent legally for people like me who have been harmed to be able to get justice for themselves, and that these doctors are going to be scared out of doing this ever again.
I hope that too. I know you have over 76,000 followers on Instagram. I'm looking at your page right now. So there are people who are really following you and your story. Um, I can't let you go without asking, how here you are at 20 years of age, you've been through the ringer. How are you mentally and emotionally right now?
I mean, it's not always easy, but the older I get and the more time passes, the more I heal, the better I get. And I am certainly a lot better than I ever was when I was living a lie every day, when I felt like my entire identity was contingent on maintaining this lifelong, what would have been a lifelong course of treatment. And through accepting things as they were, through accepting the fact that I could never change these parts of my body, that it didn't matter how much I had lost, that I would always have this beautiful God-given part of me, that I was always called to be a woman, and I could find happiness in that. It's been life-changing. And through speaking out, I began with speaking on, when I started speaking in person, it began with speaking on legislation. I've traveled through almost all 50 states now to tell my story in various legislatures. I've spoken in courts to uphold these laws as well. But I've also connected with many different communities across the US, with different churches, speaking at school boards, at town halls. And I also have, I think one of the favorite parts about my career right now is getting to connect with people my age, not only through social media, but also by giving lectures and doing tablings at college campuses. And that's something that I've wanted to do from very early on, because I feel like my generation is often overlooked in many different ways. And I feel like that's a big part of what's caused this massive identity crisis, not only in regards to the transgender issue, but just in general with Generation Z and beyond.
Yeah.
We're being overlooked. A lot of our older counterparts don't really know how to interact with us. So what better opportunity than to have somebody who has gone through that identity crisis through the extreme to be able to connect with them and to be able to tell them, like, there is hope. Like, you can build your identity through other means, and that we are the generation who I think are going to be instrumental in rebuilding the world around us. And here's how. It's brought me a lot of purpose.
That's
and
awesome.
I've connected with a lot of wonderful, beautiful people along the way.
How much resistance have you faced? Because you can go into some of these college situations and they think you are the enemy, Chloe, that, because gender identity is this big part of academia these days. They see you as you can't listen to her. So how much resistance do you face?
Oh, I mean, they see me as a threat. They think that I'm threatening the very existence of transgender people just by telling my story. And I understand where they're coming from. I used to be one of those very ideologically captured people, and I know the distress that they're going through and how it's connected to how their identity is connected to their cause and how they feel like they have nothing beyond that. I've been there. I totally get them. But there's so many of these people that just come in large swarms to protest, to yell, to scream. They get violent. Like, at recent tablings of mine, they've gotten very close to me. They've been very disruptive, and people have even been like punched or assaulted or spat on. It's, unfortunately, there has been like a huge uptick in violence across college campuses, just in general. And it can be scary, but it's never going to deter me from giving my message. And those people are the ones who need it the most.
The people that are getting violent?
Absolutely. And they may not listen, but they may not listen initially, but giving them that chance, I think that even they deserve it.
No question. Everyone deserves that chance. And what I think is laudable, though, Chloe, is that you're also giving other people permission to say, okay, I never agreed with this stuff to begin with, or I never thought this was a wise practice, but now I have someone that's giving me permission to say so, that's giving me permission to say, you know what? I know better, and I don't agree with this practice. How close do you
Absolutely.
think we are as a country to following the likes of the UK and banning this practice for kids of a certain age?
I think that we are closer than ever. And just within the past few years, there's not only been a bunch of like legislative and legal progress, but there's also been a lot of cultural progress as well. Just within the conversations that people have on a daily basis, and in the media, it's talked about completely differently, I think. And there's no longer this stronghold by the woke left over the discussion around this. So we can finally talk about it in complete honesty about the harms that this, not only the physical treatments cause to their patients, but also the broader harms in our institutions from the ideology around transgenderism. And I think that it's not only my voice, but also the voices of other detransitioners that have been instrumental in that, because many people have known for and been concerned with this issue for a very long time, for decades even, especially within the last decade with how proliferative it's become. But without actual victims, without people who have shown the actual physical consequences and harms of this, I think it's incredibly difficult to get any foothold on pushing, or it was incredibly difficult for there to get any foothold in creating any real progress. And I think in the United States, we have 27 states now that have passed measures to protect children from these treatments. There have been many other measures to affect other parts of the institutional capture of this ideology. But there also are a lot of states, like I'm from California. California, obviously, very obviously, is going in the very, very opposite direction,
So
continuing
is
to
the state I
facilitate this
live in, which is
harm
Minnesota.
and the
Minnesota is
abuse.
now a harbor for this movement.
Yes, I think that. I mean, obviously, with the new administration, there is a lot of interest in addressing transgenderism on a federal level, with all the executive orders that have come out around the sports issue, around the protection of children and targeting these children's hospitals, and instituting a federal definition of the two sexes, which it's ridiculous that we even have to, but it's been a long time coming. Eventually, though, we're going to have to go beyond executive orders.
Yeah.
And there recently was a report that was created by the HHS, similar to the CAST report that was conducted in the United Kingdom and in countries in other European countries. That the bottom line from all these reports has been that there are severe consequences from these treatments, particularly in children, and that we need to have there is no robust evidence that is in favor of doing these of experimenting on transgender people medically. That we need more evidence, and I'm hoping that that review is going to facilitate a lot of governmental action that will eventually completely eradicate this practice of maiming and abusing our children in our medical institutions. I have a lot
Chloe,
of hope.
do you still want to have a family someday?
Absolutely. I think the biggest reason why I had stopped transitioning was because I realized that I wanted to have a family of my own one day, that I wanted to become a mother, that I wanted to have natural biological children of my own. And now I've come to peace with the fact that I'm very confident that I'll be able to that I'll be able to have children of my own, because I have friends who also transitioned into children and they've had healthy, happy, beautiful babies of their own. But if it's not in the cards for me, I'm perfectly fine with adopting, because God gives us families in many different forms, and I'll take it however it's given.
I have one of each, a biological and an adopted child, and I promise you, you are spot on with what you just said about how we build our families. Chloe, it is an absolute privilege to speak to you, to hear your story, and to sort of like get to watch such a young person have such an impact And I hope you know that. And I hope you feel buoyed by the people who do support you. And I would love to follow up with you again another time, because there's just so much to talk about. I'm excited for your future. You are the kind of person that gives me optimism and hope in your generation. And so thank you very much for sharing everything with us today. We couldn't appreciate it more.
And thank you. Thank you for giving me this platform to share my story further.
Oh, anytime. Anytime. I say at the end of every podcast, folks, I say, be brave and do good. And that's Chloe Cole in a nutshell. Chloe, thank you. We'll see you next time, everyone. Hey, you can keep up with the Trump administration when you subscribe to the Trump Report. It's an email that brings you daily highlights from the Oval Office right to your inbox 5 days a week. Subscribe today at SalemPodcastNetwork.com/Trump.